When Hashem is speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu about Yetzias Mitzrayim, he says, "V'nosati eschein ha'om hazeh," I'm going to give the favor of the Yidden in the eyes of the Egyptians. The Medrash explains that since Hashem has promised Avraham Avinu that after the enslavement, they're then going to go out with great wealth. If the Yidden don't go out with a great wealth, Avraham Avinu is going to be able to complain that va'avodim v'inu oisam, torturing the Yidden and enslaving the Yidden, that was fulfilled in them. And then and the fact that they have to go out in great wealth, Hashem did not fulfill. So asks the Rebbe, seemingly, what difference does it make the fact that Avraham Avinu is going to complain? Doesn't Hashem have to fulfill his promise either way? The Rebbe now quotes a Gemara similar to the Medrash. And this is on the pasuk in Parshas Boy, where Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu to ask the Yidden to go to the Egyptians and ask them for silver vessels, golden vessels, etc. Says the Gemara, Amri Devei Rav Yanai, the word no, daber no ba'oznayom, is a request. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, please ask the Yidden that they should beg them that they should go to the Egyptians and ask them for silver and gold, so that the tzaddik, referring to Avraham Avinu, shouldn't say the same idea that va'avodim v'inu oisam kiyim b'hem, he fulfilled the promise that they're going to be slaves, but then didn't fulfill the promise that they're going to go out berchush gadol. Says the Rebbe, in the Gemara we don't have such a strong question, because here, since the Yidden are being asked to go and ask the Egyptians for silver and gold, and the Yidden could say, as Rashi actually brings and the Gemara brings, that the Yidden could say, we're ready to give up on all of the wealth as long as we go out by ourselves. So Hashem is saying, look, I cannot fulfill their request because I don't want that Avraham Avinu should be complaining. But in the Medrash, we're just speaking about Hashem saying that he's going to fulfill his promise. Why is it relevant what Avraham Avinu is going to say? In order to explain this, says the Rebbe, obviously Hashem is going to fulfill his promise. If he promised something, of course he's going to fulfill it. Nevertheless, it's possible that Hashem should fulfill his promise, that the Yidden should get great wealth, and yet somehow Avraham Avinu could still complain. And this is what we're going to see now, is what the Medrash is saying and what the Gemara is saying, and how they're different to each other as well. The Medrash says that it's only going to be if the Nosati eschein ha'om b'einei Mitzrayim. That means if the Egyptians are going to give all the silver and gold willingly, this is going to help, that Avraham shouldn't have any complaints. According to the Gemara, even that wouldn't be enough. It has to be in a way that the Yidden are going to ask for the silver and gold. How do we understand all of this? Says the Rebbe, the Gemara tells a story how the Bnei Mitzrayim, the descendants of the Egyptians, came to Alexander the Great and with a claim against the Yidden that they should return all the silver and gold that they took from them. A Yid called Gviya ben Psisa argued back and said, you give us back the money for all of the work that you enslaved the 600,000 Yidden. The Mefarshim explained that what this is saying is that the wealth that the Yidden got when they left Mitzrayim was actually as a payment for their work. So now, says the Rebbe, when we look at the Rechush Gadol, at the wealth that the Yidden got when they left Mitzrayim, there's really two things happening. It's a punishment for the Egyptians, but it's also a payment for the Yidden. And here becomes the question, which one out of these two is really the main thing? Because Hashem says to Avraham Avinu at the Bris Bein Absarim, V'gam es hagoy asher ya'avodu, the nation that's going to enslave them, I'm going to judge them, I'm going to punish them. And then it says, and then the Yidden are going to leave with great wealth. So there's two ways of understanding what's happening. One way of understanding it is that the fact that the Yidden are leaving with great wealth, that's part of the punishment to the Egyptians. So the Egyptians are losing their money. It's just that the Yidden are going to receive it because after all, they were the ones that were enslaved and worked. Another way of understanding it is the other way around. The main point of the Yidden leaving with the great wealth is as a payment for their work. But at the same time, there's also going to be a punishment for the Egyptians, and that's why it's being taken away from them. What practical difference is there between these two ways? If it's a punishment for the Egyptians, then it's no real difference how the money leaves them, how they lose their money. For example, if the Yidden would have taken it during Makas Choshech, then it would also be fulfilled that they lost their money. But if we're saying that it needs to be as a payment to the Yidden for their work, then it needs to be felt that it was a payment. It needs to be in a way that the Egyptians are actually giving it to the Yidden. And that's what the Medrash is saying. The Medrash is saying is that the only way the promise of Acharech and Yetzer B'Chush Gadol can be fulfilled properly is if the Yidden are going to find favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians are going to give willingly the wealth to the Yidden. So again, the actual promise of the Eibishter could have been fulfilled even in a different way. And even if it wouldn't have been noticeable that it's a payment, if the Yidden, bottom line, if the Yidden get the money. But then Avraham Avinu could still a bit complain. Because as a father, Avraham Avinu, he wants the benefit of Am Yisrael. He wants that it should be noticeable that this is a payment for their work. And then that's going to be somewhat of a comfort for all their bitter harshness of the Golus. And therefore it has to be that the Goyim, the Egyptians, are giving it willingly. That's the Medrash. Comes along the Gemara and adds even a further point. That it's also important that the Yidden should ask for the silver and gold. Because even if the Egyptians are giving the money, it's still not 100% noticeable that it's a payment for their work. You could still argue that maybe it's just gifts that they're giving them. Or they're having Rachmanas on the Yidden, that the Yidden just shouldn't leave completely empty-handed into the desert. But it's only when the Yidden come and ask and demand for the money, here it's really noticeable that in truth, it's a payment and it actually they deserve it. The Rebbe now moves on to explaining all of this Beruchnius. We know that the idea that the Yidden left B'Chush Gadol wasn't only the physical wealth, but it's all the godly sparks that they took along with the wealth. All the godly sparks that they elevated being a Mitzrayim. And that's really the point of Golus Mitzrayim, is that eventually the Yidden will leave with all of these sparks, Yetzer B'Chush Gadol, to elevate all of these holy sparks. Now, as a result of them working Mitzrayim and elevating these sparks, the Yidden themselves also end up benefiting. They also get an aliyah. They're also elevated. So here again, we can look at it in these two ways. The two ways again being, is it mainly about the Egyptians getting punished, or is that a reward for Bnei Yisrael? If we looked at it that the main thing was about a punishment for the Egyptians, so looking at this idea of bitter hanitzoitzis will be the same idea. The main point why Yidden were there was to elevate the sparks. It's only that the Yidden, since they're the ones that did the avodah, they also end up being elevated as a result of it. But again, Avraham Avinu looks at it and says no. He's looking at it that it's all mainly it's mainly about the Bnei Yisrael. And the whole tachlis was that Yidden should be able to come to their greatest levels. And that's why they went to Golus. They went to Golus to elevate the sparks so that the Yidden should be able to come out in a much higher way. In other words, the tachlis is the aliyah. It's only that the way they get the aliyah is by elevating the sparks. And that's why, again, it's important that the Egyptians should give it to the Bnei Yisrael, which emphasizes the whole goal is Bnei Yisrael. And therefore, in a certain sense, these godly sparks themselves are helping along Bnei Yisrael in their avodah. Now, from Mitzrayim, Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Rebbe now applies it to the avodah of each and every one of us. The neshama, as we know, also came down here into our world to elevate the guf, the nefesh habahamis, the world, to connect it all to Hashem, to make a dira b'tachtoinim. That's on the one hand. There's also the idea that the neshama ends up benefiting out of it. Yeridat tzoyrech aliyah, the descendants of the neshama ultimately will become even greater. And here again, there's two ways to look at it. Is the kavanah the elevation of the world, and the fact that the Yid is doing the avodah, so he ends up getting elevated? Or is it the other way around? The whole tachlis is the Yid, that he should come to his greatest perfection. Now, the way he gets it as a means to an end is through elevating the world. Now, this is actually going to have some practical implications as well. There's two types of avodah. There's an avodah of what's called an eved pashat, a simple servant. It doesn't make any difference to him what he's doing. He's just doing it with complete Kabbalah soil. He knows he's just doing the mission, doing what Hashem wants. That's one way. Another way is that even though he's doing it with Kabbalah soil, but he also understands what's being achieved with the avodah. What's the point of the avodah? That he's making a dira lo yizbarich, a place for Hashem. And these two different ways of avodah are going to express itself also and make a difference to the aliyah that the neshama has as a result of the avodah. Because if he's just doing it as a simple servant, then the reward that comes afterwards is a completely separate thing to the avodah itself. Yes, he did avodah, and eventually he also gets a certain payment. But if we understand it, that within the avodah itself, the whole time he feels the purpose and the goal, that he's making a dira for Hashem, then when he has the aliyah afterwards, it's not a separate thing from the avodah. Rather, the aliyah of the neshama is this itself, that he brought down atzmus through his avodah, and this itself is now being revealed to the neshama. Now the Rebbe takes it one step further. Within this itself, that it's being felt in the avodah, the purpose of the avodah, we can now have two ways, which is going to fit with the Gemara and the Medrash. One way is that it's only felt at the end of the avodah what was actually achieved. The other way is that every minute in the avodah itself, he feels the whole time, he has not only he's doing what Hashem wants, and he knows that Hashem wants a dira b'tachtonim, he is himself feeling that he wants to make a dira for Hashem. And this is going to be the difference between the Medrash and the Gemara. According to the Medrash, the point is, the ultimate goal is not necessarily felt the whole time during the work. It's only at the very end of the work. And for that would be enough that the Egyptians give their payment at the end. He didn't feel they need a payment, and the Egyptians pay them. But according to the Gemara, it was felt the whole time, in every moment of the work, it's felt that the whole purpose of the work is for the Rechush Gadol, which is spiritually the bitter Hanitzoitzes, and therefore it's very important that the Yidden should ask for the reward, meaning to say that because it's felt that this is all as a part and the continuation of the Avodah that they were doing the whole time. And the Rebbe finishes off with a Hairah to our general Avodah during the time of Golus. Again, on the one hand, of course, the Yid needs to learn Torah and do mitzvahs with Kabbalah soil. But at the same time, we also know that everything that's going to happen when Mashiach comes is dependent on our Avodah. So when we feel within our Avodah that this is hastening the coming of Mashiach, and we feel in our Avodah how what we're doing right now is bringing the whole world to its completion, to its tachlis, to the purpose for why it was created, then the Avodah itself is done in a completely different way, with more chayis, with more hidur. And then we also, like the Yidden back then, were able to demand the reward in a certain way. So we are demanding Mashiach in a completely different way. And this itself hastens the Geula, that it should come take it from Miyad Mamish now.